1958. 2 years into her marriage. Grace stood in front of the full-length mirror in her dressing room, wearing the formal gown required for tonight's state dinner. Chanel. Emerald green silk. The Grimaldi emeralds at her throat. Hair swept into an elaborate updo. Makeup applied by the palace's personal stylist. She looked perfect. She looked like Princess Grace. But as Grace stared at her reflection, all she could think was, this is a costume. And I can never take it off. When she had been an actress, costumes had been temporary. She would arrive at the studio as Grace Kelly, transform into whatever character the role required, and at the end of the day, she would remove the costume and return to being herself. But this costume, the gowns, the jewels, the title, the smile, the perfect posture, the gracious words, this costume was permanent. There was no going back to Grace Kelly at the end of the day. Because Grace Kelly no longer existed. There was only Princess Grace. 24 hours a day. 7 days a week. Forever. Grace's lady-in-waiting appeared in the doorway. Your Highness, the guests are arriving. The prince is waiting for you. Thank you, Marie. I'll be down in a moment. Marie curtsied and left. Grace turned back to the mirror. She had worn hundreds of costumes in her acting career. Each one had helped her become someone else, a frightened wife in Dial M for murder, a sophisticated cat burglar's accomplice in To Catch a Thief, a bitter alcoholic spouse in The Country Girl. But those costumes had been liberating. They had allowed Grace to explore different parts of herself, to express emotions and experiences she couldn't access as Grace Kelly. This costume was the opposite. It was a prison. A straitjacket. A mask she could never remove. Princess Grace had to be perfect always. Composed always. Gracious always. Smiling always. There was no room for anger. No space for grief. No permission for authenticity. Just the endless performance of princesshood. Grace picked up her gloves, white silk, elbow length, required for formal occasions. She had to wear gloves so often now that her hands felt strange without them. Covered. Protected. Hidden. Like the rest of her. She thought about a conversation she'd had with Edith Head, the legendary costume designer she'd worked with in Hollywood. Edith had understood that costumes weren't just clothing, they were transformations. A good costume, Edith had told her, helps you find the character. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you think. You put on the costume and suddenly you're someone else. Grace had loved that feeling. The moment when the costume clicked and Grace Kelly disappeared and the character emerged. But now she understood the dark side of that transformation. What happened when the costume never came off? What happened when you forgot who you were underneath? Grace walked down the grand staircase toward the state dining room, her heels clicking on marble, her gown rustling with each step. Other people might see a princess descending. Grace saw an actress in costume, heading toward another performance. Except this performance had no end. No director would call cut. No one would say that's a wrap. This was her life now. An endless costume, an eternal role. Rainier met her at the bottom of the stairs. He looked distinguished in his formal military uniform, another costume, Grace thought, though he seemed more comfortable in his than she felt in hers. You look beautiful, he said, offering his arm. Thank you. Grace took his arm, and together they walked toward the dining room where 50 guests waited. The evening proceeded exactly as planned. Grace sat at the head of the table, making conversation with the French ambassador's wife on her right and the Monaco finance minister on her left. She smiled. She laughed at appropriate moments. She asked polite questions and gave polite answers. She performed Princess Grace flawlessly. But inside, Grace Kelly was screaming. Because she couldn't remember the last time she had been allowed to be genuine. The last time she had spoken honestly about what she felt, what she wanted, what she needed. Everything was filtered through the costume of Princess Grace. And the costume allowed no authenticity. Midway through dinner, the conversation turned to the arts. Someone mentioned a new theatrical production in Paris. Your Highness, the French ambassador said, I understand you were quite accomplished as an actress before your marriage. Do you miss the theatre? The entire table quieted, waiting for her answer. Grace felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on her. 50 people waiting to hear Princess Grace give the appropriate response. "I found new ways to contribute to the arts here in Monaco," Grace said smoothly. "My work with the Arts Foundation is very fulfilling." The expected answer. The diplomatic answer. The lie. "But surely you must miss performing," the ambassador persisted. The applause, the creative challenge. "I perform every day," Grace interrupted, then caught herself. That had been too honest. She softened it with a smile. "What I mean is, being a princess is its own kind of performance. One learns to embrace the role." Polite laughter around the table. Crisis averted. The conversation moved on. But Grace's heart was pounding. Because for a moment, she had almost told the truth. "Yes, I miss it. Yes, I'm miserable. Yes, this costume is suffocating me and I don't know how to take it off." After dinner, there was dancing in the ballroom. Grace waltzed with the French ambassador, then the finance minister, then various other dignitaries. Each dance was perfectly executed. Each conversation was perfectly appropriate. Perfect. 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 Grace excused herself to the powder room, needing a moment alone. She locked the door and leaned against the sink, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman looking back was beautiful. Elegant. Every hair in place. Makeup still flawless despite hours of smiling. A stranger. Grace reached up and touched her face, as if trying to find herself underneath the makeup, the styling, the perfect presentation. But there was nothing there. Just the costume. Just the mask. Just Princess Grace. Where had Grace Kelly gone? A knock at the door. "Your Highness. Are you all right?" "Yes, I'll be right out." Grace reapplied her lipstick, smoothed her gown, checked that every detail was perfect. Then she unlocked the door and returned to the ballroom. The performance must continue. That night, after all the guests had left, after Grace had said goodnight to Rainier and retreated to her separate bedroom, she finally removed the physical costume. The gown. The jewels. The uncomfortable shoes. The elaborate hairstyle. The makeup. One by one, the pieces of Princess Grace came off. But when Grace looked in the mirror, she still saw a stranger. Because the real costume, the one she could never remove, wasn't the clothing or the jewelry. It was the personality. The demeanor. The entire constructed identity of Princess Grace. That costume had seeped into her skin. It had replaced her. It had become her. Grace Kelly had put on the costume of Princess Grace 2 years ago. And she was realizing, with growing horror, that she couldn't remember how to take it off. She had become the costume. The costume had become her. And there was no Grace Kelly underneath anymore. Just layers and layers of Princess Grace, all the way down to her bones. Grace sat on the edge of her bed in her nightgown, her face bare, her hair down, and still felt like she was in costume. Because she was. Always. The costume she could never remove. The role she could never escape. The performance that would continue until death. When she had been an actress, Grace had understood the power of costume. How it could transform you. How it could help you access parts of yourself you didn't know existed. But she had never understood the danger. That you could put on a costume and forget how to take it off. That you could play a role so long you forgot who you were when you weren't performing. That you could become the character and lose yourself entirely. Grace Kelly had put on the costume of Princess Grace. And 2 years later, Grace Kelly was gone. There was only the costume now. Empty. Hollow. Performing. Grace lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about all the costumes she had worn in her acting career. Lisa Carol Fremont's elegant suits in Rear Window. Frances Stevens's glamorous gowns in To Catch a Thief. Georgie Elgin's dowdy dresses in The Country Girl. She had loved wearing those costumes because she could take them off. She could be Grace Kelly again. But this costume, Princess Grace, was different. It had no zipper. No buttons. No way to remove it. It was her skin now. Her face. Her voice. Her entire existence. And Grace Kelly was buried so deep underneath that she might as well be dead. The costume she could never remove. The role she could never escape. The death she was living every single day. Grace closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be herself. To speak honestly. To feel authentically. To exist without performing. But she couldn't remember. The costume had won. Princess Grace was all that remained. And Grace Kelly was just a ghost, haunting a palace in Monaco, mourning herself. Forever in costume. Forever performing. Forever lost. The woman who had loved costumes because they let her be someone else had become trapped in a costume she could never escape. The irony was crushing. Grace fell asleep that night still feeling like she was wearing a mask. Still feeling like Princess Grace, even alone in the darkness. Because the costume never came off. Not when she was sleeping. Not when she was alone. Not ever. Grace Kelly had disappeared into her greatest role. And there was no going back. The costume had consumed her. And all that was left was the performance. Perfect. Endless. Empty. Forever. The days that followed that state dinner became a turning point for Grace. She began to notice the costume everywhere. In everything she did. When she woke in the morning, she put on the costume of Princess Grace before even leaving her bedroom. The proper nightgown. The robe that was elegant enough to be seen by servants. The awareness that even in private, she was being watched. When she breakfasted with her children, she wore the costume of perfect mother. Patient. Gentle. Never frustrated. Never overwhelmed. When she attended charity events, she wore the costume of gracious benefactor. Interested. Compassionate. Never tired. Never bored. When she dined with Rainier, she wore the costume of dutiful wife. Supportive. Pleasant. Never angry. Never resentful. Layer upon layer of costumes, each one replacing more of Grace Kelly until there was nothing left but Princess Grace performing from dawn until midnight. Grace started keeping a secret list in her private journal. She titled it, "Times I Couldn't Remove the Costume." March 12, 1958. Caroline asked me why I never laugh anymore. I told her I do laugh. But I realized I only smile. The costume doesn't allow real laughter. April 3, 1958. Wanted to scream at Rainier for dismissing my opinion about the arts budget. Instead, I nodded graciously and changed the subject. The costume requires compliance. May 15, 1958. Saw a film crew shooting in Monaco. Watched them work for 20 minutes. Felt such longing I had to leave before anyone saw me cry. The costume forbids grief. June 8, 1958. State dinner. French ambassador asked about acting. Almost told the truth. Caught myself. The costume demands lies. Each entry was a small acknowledgement that Grace Kelly was disappearing. That the costume was winning. One afternoon, Grace found herself alone in the palace wardrobe room, surrounded by hundreds of gowns. Each one perfect. Each one expensive. Each one a costume for a different royal occasion. She pulled out a simple black dress from the back, one of her own pieces from her Hollywood days. She had brought it with her when she moved to Monaco, though she never wore it anymore. It was too plain for Princess Grace. Too ordinary. Too much like something Grace Kelly would have worn. Grace held it up to herself and looked in the mirror. For a moment, just a flash, she saw Grace Kelly looking back at her. The woman who had worn simple black dresses to auditions. Who had chosen roles based on artistic merit, not obligation. Who had laughed freely and spoke honestly and felt deeply. That woman was gone. Grace hung the dress back in the wardrobe, hidden behind the elaborate gowns and formal wear that had replaced it. She couldn't wear it anymore. It didn't fit the costume of Princess Grace. And if she wore it, she might remember too much. Feel too much. Want too much. Better to leave it hidden. Better to forget it existed. Better to accept that Grace Kelly's clothes, like Grace Kelly herself, belonged to the past. The costume of Princess Grace was her present. And her future. Forever. That evening, Grace attended another event, this time a cultural gala at the Opera House. She wore a gold lame gown, diamond tiara, the full royal regalia. Everyone said she looked stunning. Like a fairy tale princess. And Grace smiled and thanked them, playing her part perfectly. But inside, she was thinking, this isn't me. This has never been me. I'm just wearing a costume that I can't take off." During the opera, a performance of La Traviata, Grace watched the soprano on stage. The actress was completely lost in the role of Violetta, the courtesan dying of consumption. She sang with such raw emotion, such complete commitment, that the entire audience was transfixed. Grace felt tears on her cheeks. Not because of the story, but because she recognized something in that performance. The soprano could remove her costume at the end of the opera. She could go back to being herself. Grace would never have that again. Never remove the costume. Never return to herself. She was Violetta at the end of the opera, dying, but without the mercy of an actual ending. Just dying slowly, forever, while everyone applauded the beautiful performance. After the opera, at the reception, a young actress approached Grace. "Your Highness, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I grew up watching your films. Rear Window made me want to become an actress. You were so natural, so alive on screen. Thank you for inspiring me." Grace felt like she'd been stabbed. "That's very kind," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "I'm glad you've pursued your passion. Never take it for granted." "Did you miss it?" the young actress asked. "Acting, I mean. After you stopped?" Grace looked at this young woman, so full of hope and ambition and artistic passion. So much like Grace Kelly had once been. "Every day," Grace said quietly. Then, louder, with a smile, "But life takes us in unexpected directions. I wish you great success in your career." She excused herself before the actress could ask more questions. Before Grace said something honest and true and completely inappropriate for Princess Grace. That night, removing the gold gown and the tiara and the diamonds, Grace finally understood the full horror of her situation. The costume she wore wasn't just clothing. It was personality. It was behavior. It was thought patterns. It was the complete suppression of Grace Kelly in favor of Princess Grace. And after 2 years of wearing this costume every moment of every day, Grace could barely remember who she had been underneath. The costume had done its job too well. It had transformed her, consumed her, replaced her. Grace Kelly was a memory, a ghost, a woman who had existed once but was gone now. And Princess Grace, the costume, the performance, the eternal role, was all that remained. Grace looked at herself in the mirror one last time before bed. Bare face, simple nightgown, hair down, as close to unadorned as she was allowed to be. But even here, even alone, she still felt like she was wearing a costume. Because the costume had become her skin, her bones, her very essence. There was no taking it off. No returning to Grace Kelly. No escape. Just the endless performance of Princess Grace, wearing a costume that had fused to her body, her mind, her soul. Until death would finally remove it. Until the final curtain. Until the costume and the woman became one in death, indistinguishable, inseparable. Grace Kelly had loved costumes once. They had been her tool, her art, her way of exploring the world. Now a costume was her prison, her torture, her slow death. The costume she could never remove. The role she could never escape. The performance that would last until her final breath. And even then, Grace suspected, she would be buried in costume. Dressed as Princess Grace. Perfect to the very end. No one would ever see Grace Kelly again. Not even in death. Just the costume. Forever. Eternal. Inescapable. The greatest role of her career. And the one that killed her.